pages 15 and 16 that contain the rejection criteria. This is the substance of their rationale for rejecting all the criteria except what they are recommending. And it organizes in a way that you can see the patterns. For example, for the Erin Mills, it's sorted based upon the number of schools recommended for closure. And I'll be talking about, let's see, I'll just move this here, and this section here, I'm sorry, this part here, that's the section that has to do with the possibility of closing only 2 schools in Erin Mills rather than 3. And these are the reasons they're rejected. Criteria 2 and criteria 6. The next slide here expands that rejection criteria description. And all that the ARC report says is that enrollment in some schools is lower than preferred. Now that's not a quote, that's a paraphrasing. That's all it says. So the reason we're closing 2 out of 3 schools is primarily based on that one-line comment. Certainly they can put together a clear case that Hillside as a single school has all kinds of advantages relative to the alternatives, but they're not addressing the fundamental option and evaluating it relative to 2 schools remaining open in the community. Similarly with Erin Mills, and maybe even more troubling in Erin Mills, because in Erin Mills you've got 250 students that used to be bused from Erin Mills down to Park Royal that are no longer being bused down, and yet they're closing 3 out of 7 schools, and with highly in excess of their capacity, and with a commitment, with an expectation of having portables for years. And it just seems excessive. You know, it's hard to understand. I do not personally believe that they have validated the proposals, and I struggle with that. At the same time, I'm not sure at the end of the day that we'd come to a different conclusion in Park Royal, but I think the community deserves a more objective assessment of the alternatives involved, and not a single-minded focus on allowing the ARC committee to only put forward one recommendation. I met with members of the Community Association, with the ARC chair, and with the trustee, and we encouraged them to allow the members of the ARC to put forward an alternative if the board decided to close only 1 school instead of 2. In other words, it's not the ARC's role to make that decision. It's the board's role to make a decision at the end of the day on how many schools. And they may well recommend that 2 schools close, but surely they should identify an alternative that's viable if the board decides to close any 1 school. I was told flatly that that's against board policy. They would not support that, and they would not oppose us. They would not support it. Unfortunately, that preceded the events where the trustee appeared to be involved in undermining the arrangements to have such a meeting within the community to discuss that and simply try to encourage a viable alternative to be identified. Pick what the committee thinks is the best alternative to close only 1 school and evaluate it. What are the advantages and disadvantages in an explicit way? What I struggle with is that the committee sits down and the board presents views. I mean, here's an example that just drives me crazy. I forget the numbers, but during the public meetings, one of the parent reps got up and said, what we have learned is that the ideal size for a school is between 400 to 600 students. And I apologize, I'm going over too. I'll try to speed up. It's between 400 and 600. So I said to a number of people, is that for K to 8 or K to 5? And they said it doesn't matter. Well, I struggle with what kind of reasoning people are using, so I just struggle. Let me quickly end with my comments. This is a re-paraphrasing, a reordering of the evaluation checklist. I do not think it had a key role in the decisions, but I think if you look at it, if you study this list, it gives insights in terms of one fundamental issue. It is nonsensical that each of those items has an equal weighting. It's nonsensical to me that the first one, maximizes use of facilities, has the same weighting as enhances parental involvement in terms of the closure of a school. That says to me that it makes nonsensical the board's comment that these evaluation checklist items identify and confirm the relative priority that shareholders get. It's just nonsensical to me. Finally, these are the Erin Mills community scenarios. And what I would point out here, the main thing I would point out here is one thing. When you look at their consideration of closing only 2 schools in Erin Mills, when you look at that, they only ever looked at closing 2 specific schools. They never considered the combination of any other schools except with one exception. On the other hand, with the idea of closing 4 schools, they've got, I think, 9 different scenario alternatives. What kind of community would come up with that kind of a perspective? I apologize for going over.
Thank you.
I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you leave the podium, are there any questions of clarification? And there are. Trustee McDougald.
Okay, I have to clarify something. Let me understand what you're saying. Are you trying to say that I, the trustee representing your community, undermined or somehow stopped the Park Royal Community Association from having a meeting on August 3rd?
I guess I would ask you the same question I asked you before that you would not reply to. I understand that you were provided with invitations. I don't know if it was at your request or for whatever, so that you would be the one sending out the invitations to the parent reps to attend that meeting, number 1. Number 2, I was told the invitations were sent to you. Number 3, that was like a week before the meeting. I'm not sure the time. The day, when we went to go to the meeting, there was no meeting. It didn't happen. So my question to you was, what is the length of time between when you received the invitations to be sent to the our parent reps for Park Royal and the time point at which the meeting was canceled? What was that time period?
So, as we're not questioning here, but I'm asking, are you trying to say I canceled that meeting?
No, I'm saying...
That's the question, clarification.
No, the problem is I sought information that you would not provide. So all I know is that you had an involvement in the arrangements for that meeting. The invitations went to you. And my problem is I feel baited in the sense of trying to get me to say something, but you're withholding information. I'm simply asking you, what was the time period between when you received the invitations and did not send them out, and as I understand, and the time that the meeting was canceled in terms of hours or days? Can you provide that information?
Through you, Chair, I'd just like to make the comment that I did not cancel the meeting.
No, I didn't say that.
And it was done by the Park Royal Association. I had no involvement in setting the meeting or canceling the meeting.
Were you involved in setting out the invitations?
Okay, wait a minute, Mr. Anderson, first of all, and I've really given some leeway here because you did make an accusation, and I will allow Trustee McDougald to clarify the accusation, but it's not going to be a debate.
No. I did not make an accusation.
I understand. Well, you suggested they did not send out invitations. That's what you said.
No. That's basically what my understanding is that he didn't. But I think his point was that he didn't send them out because the meeting was canceled before he could send them out. Right. So I'm not making an accusation of anything. I'm just trying to understand.
You're asking him the timeline between receiving them and canceling.
There's a huge difference if he received the invitation and didn't send them out, and then 3 days later they decided to cancel the meeting.
But we aren't going to have that debate.
I had no intention of getting into the discussion.
Trustee McDougald, you're finished. Thank you. Mr. Anderson, is it? I'm sorry, it is. Have Trustee Green, and it's a question of clarification, please.
Yes, it's just a quick question of clarification. You stated in your presentation that the HARC and my colleague did not send out information to the community, but report back to the HARC that they did. Is that a fact? Is that what you were saying in your presentation? I just want a clarification. Sorry, if that's what you're saying, is it yes or no?
What is it you thought I said, sorry?
You said in your presentation that the ARC and the trustee that represent the area report to the ARC committee that they send out information to the community.
Oh, the survey. No, there was a survey taken of the community, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the trustee and the ARC chair are fully aware, there was no survey taken. There was a misunderstanding, as I understand it. And my concern is not that there was a misunderstanding, but that they did not disclose at the public meeting themselves that there had been no survey distributed. And they identified to the ARC members just before voting the understanding from this 4,000 person survey that the community preference, it was very low response rate, that the community preference is what the minutes say. The community preference is that 2 schools should close. But there was no community survey.
Okay.
And I think they're fully aware of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So who do I give the paper to for?
Hang on, just one moment, one more trustee. Trustee Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Anderson, I'm a little fuzzy.
Yep.
What would you like this board to do tonight?
Oh, there's a number of considerations in there. In terms of the vote, I'm troubled by 2 things. I'm troubled by the fact that the Erin Mills community does not feel there's any point in speaking to the board, which surprises me when you're looking at closing 3 out of 7 schools. I don't think it's my role to say that they shouldn't do anything. The process, my main concern is the ARC process itself going forward. I'm troubled by what happened. I don't practically think that this board is going to decide not to proceed. That's what I think is going to happen. So my asking them not to proceed, I think, is. But I'm troubled by what happens. I think a key thing that's important to know is does the board really have a policy that when you have an ARC, they're prohibited from identifying and putting forward a viable scenario if the decision was to close a different number of schools? I'm really troubled that would be a board policy. And one of my first priorities would get that, they would change that. There's other things they should change. If a parent, rep, cannot continue to represent their school, the board policy is you can't replace them. Well, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. They were able to replace the chair of the committee. Certainly you'd have to. But there's a number of things, and I'm a bit concerned that the board policy is potentially self-serving with the objective of minimizing the. I could have gone on with a whole bunch of other concerns about the way the community's been dealt with. On the other hand, I respect the fact that it's a difficult process, it's a complex issue. I'm not submitting a request for any particular, I just want you to understand the issues as you're making your own decisions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for delegating this evening. We will respond to it, certainly because you did raise some serious questions that I believe can be answered. We are dealing with it tonight, and I've noted specifically what you've just said, and I hope that we will be able to address that this evening, because the ARC process is a regulation that is laid out by the province, or by the Ministry of Education. So we are simply following that process. But we do have a policy, it is true, but it does mirror the Education Act.
I would submit that there's all kinds of elements of the ARC process that you are not constrained by the provincial requirements.
Well, and we can certainly discuss that, certainly, because we're always looking to improve our process. And in fact, we do. We've had 2 ARCs, and the first one was in my community, and I would suggest that the process has been refined, and it is a little better than it was then, because we were the pioneers of it. So we're open to suggestions on bettering the process as long as it's within the Ed Act.
If there was a group that is going to study that, I would welcome the opportunity of meeting with them to not harangue issues, but to address concerns in terms of how this can affect future communities.
Yeah, and we would welcome your input. So somehow, whether it's your membership or whether it is simply written input, I'm sure the board would take it seriously.
I would express preference to verbally present but not be a member of anything.
Thank you. Okay, our 8.3 is a delegation from Catherine Soplet regarding the parent reaching out grants. Catherine.